She's gone to the Shelby place. George looked at Dakota like he didn't understand what he was saying. Crystal went to the Shelby place, he said again, and this time it seemed to sink in. With that thing there? What the hell would she do that for? I don't know, Dakota said, his writhing guts at odds with what he knew he had to do. I don't know, but someone needs to go after her. I need you to stay here with Nikki. Like heck, George said. I'm not going to leave you alone to face that thing. With any luck, I won't have to. I'm hoping she hasn't made it inside yet. If I can stop her and talk some sense into her, then maybe I can... What the hell are you kids doing in my garage? George and Dakota turned to find an angry man with a baseball bat, leaning out the inner door to the garage. The thick old pine instrument seemed ready to do mayhem, and the front of his robe had come open, displaying his jockey shorts and a chest that was still tanned from the California sun. He wore glasses, his hair short but blonde like his daughter's, and Dakota realized that this was the first time he had met Crystal's father. He hoped it wouldn't be the last. I'm sorry, sir. I know this must be a terrible shock right now, but my friend needs help. We were looking for something with your daughter, but now she's in trouble. I need to go stop her before she hurts herself, but my friend here needs an ambulance. His foot's really hurt, and The sound of the bat clattering to the concrete stopped Dakota, and when the man sighed, it took him by surprise. Does this have anything to do with the Snatcher case? Dakota started to nod, but shook his head instead. He honestly wasn't sure. Has my daughter been abducted? He shook his head with a little more certainty this time. Good. Go bring her back, and I'll call an ambulance for your friend. It's honestly not the first time she's done something like this, and it's usually one of her friends who goes and gets her to come home. Dakota nodded, still not sure what to say to that, but as the man went back inside, presumably to call someone, Dakota took off for the Shelby place. He didn't have anything except his flashlight, but he hoped he wouldn't need anything else. If luck was with him, she wouldn't have been able to make it through the front door. If there was a God above who watched over children like him, then she'd be crying on the porch or fruitlessly trying to pull the boards off when he arrived. He pulled out his flashlight as he got to the edge of the weed-choked yard and began searching. Beneath the pale weeds, Dakota was surprised to see more of the tracks they had found in the field. More than one, actually. Some of them crisscrossed each other, and they seemed to be heading in all directions. Most of them ended under the porch, but many more wound around the back. He couldn't believe they had never seen or questioned these, but he supposed that they'd never really been looking. The beam of his flashlight wound up the porch steps, and when he saw the wood crisscrossing the door, he felt a rush of relief rising in him. When the wind pushed against the door and banged it against the far wall, that relief fizzled like a spark in a rainstorm. He was going to have to go into this place, whether he wanted to or not, and he very much did not. "I wouldn't if I were you," he whispered, his skin crawling as he heard himself whispering the lyrics like an incantation. "I know what she can do." He ducked between two of the boards and let his flashlight illuminate the entryway of the sagging old relic that had haunted his dreams. "She's deadly, man. She could really rip your world apart." He ducked between two of the boards, again not sure who he was singing about, as he let his flashlight illuminate the entryway to the sagging old relic that had haunted his dreams. In his nightmares, they explored for hours, the halls stretching on and on as they went through rooms that had never existed, on their way to the inevitable climax. In reality, the trip was much less grand. Dakota went left and passed into a living room with a sagging leather couch and a dusty coffee table. There was a TV across from the couch, and in his dreams it always lit the room with a hazy wash of static. It was dark now, the glass eye covered in thick dust. There was a broken tank in one corner, and another not too far away, their fronts smashed as if something had crashed its way out. The floor crunched beneath his feet, and he was glad he'd worn his sneakers instead of his high tops. He looked down at the broken glass that still covered the dusty boards and wondered why Harold Shelby had never bothered to clean it up after the kids broke the windows. He had thought enough to put the wood up, but the glass had been something he never cared to clean. Maybe it was from the tanks. Dakota didn't know, but he supposed that maybe that late in life, Harold Shelby had other priorities, or just didn't care. He really had no clue either way. As he turned his light towards the servant hallway, the dust motes danced around him like the first magical snow of the season. It was a short stretch between the living room and the kitchen. The hallway had 4 doors along it, 2 on either side, and George had been afraid that something would pop out at them like a funhouse attraction. Dakota remembered the smaller boy clinging to him as they went, and he almost felt he could hear someone crying the closer he got. The 4 of them had been afraid, other than Chris, but they had gone regardless. Regardless of the squirming dread that now lived within him, Dakota went as well, and was unsurprised to find that the crying was not his imagination. Crystal stood with her hands against the closed door, sobbing and shaking as the green of that horrid place glared around her. It was just the same as it had been in his nightmare, and time had done nothing to change the fear it instilled in him. The walls were still that deep forest green, the floor, the strange white and black tiles picking up the green and making the whole room glow. The knife was still buried in the cutting board. The sink was still dripping eternally, but the table now lay on its side. One of the legs had given way, and it had taken the chair with it when it fell. He took it all in with a single glance, before going to Crystal and trying to comfort her. "Thank God. We need to get out of here," he whispered. "It's not safe. It's in the basement," she whispered, snorting in something soupy that made her sound congested. "What?" Dakota asked, not fully understanding. "I followed it. It was injured when Nikki hit it. That's why it threatened us. It slid away once it figured out we weren't going to attack it, and I followed it here. It went right down the stairs, but when I got to the door and looked down into the depths of the basement, I couldn't bring myself to go down there. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I just kept thinking how useless I was. The answers I needed are down there, and I can't go find them. The last piece I need before going home is within reach, and I'm too scared to get it." "What are you talking about?" Dakota asked, not understanding any of it. "What piece? What answers?" She turned from the door, and he could see that she'd been crying hard. Her eyes were swollen, and there was snot dripping from her nose. She didn't seem as confident as she had all those weeks, and when he reached for her, she let him pull her in close. "I lied to you," she whispered into his shoulder. "I lied to all of you. I needed to find the Snatcher so I could help my dad. I needed him to get done so that we could get out of here, so I could go back to California." Dakota let her lean on him, her sniffling coming in spurts, and he kept his eyes on the door as she told him her dark secret. "Dad's a writer, but he's been going through some bad luck. His last 2 books flopped, and he told me we couldn't afford to live in California anymore. Mom didn't want to come with us when he came here to write a book about the Snatcher, so we left her there to stay with some friends. He rented the house until he gets the royalties from the book, but it needs an ending. It needs a conclusion. If I can find the Snatcher, then he can write about him being apprehended. Then we can go back, and Mom will come to live with us again, and we can be a family. All that's down in the basement. I just know it. I'm too much of a coward to go down there, though." They stood in silence, the wicked old golem creaking around them, as Dakota tried to make it all make sense. "So this whole time, you've been trying to leave again." I know. First, I just didn't think I could do it by myself, but after a while, I really began to think of all of you as friends. It hurt me to use you, but I had no choice. You guys know the area. You know the victims. I knew that if I had any hope of finding whoever was doing this, I needed your help." Dakota looked back at the basement door. "And you think they're down there?" "Well, I saw something go down there, and It's where the first victim disappeared from." "The first victim," Dakota breathed in. "You mean..." But he couldn't say it. He wouldn't say it. He would not say his name, not in this place. "Is there another way out of here?" he asked. Crystal shook her head. "I went around the whole house. There's no outside access. This is the only way, in or out." "Then we need to call the police," he said. "What if it leaves while we're gone?" Dakota hadn't thought of that. They would look pretty stupid if the police got here and there was nothing down there. They were probably going to be in a lot of trouble either way, but if they called the police to come on a wild goose chase, the trouble would be even worse. "Go outside and see if the ambulance is here yet." "Ambulance?" She didn't understand. "Nikki got hurt in the fall. He's definitely going to the hospital. Go see if they're here. And if they are, then see if they'll call the police. If they won't, have your dad do it. Tell him to come back after he does. I'll make sure that they don't leave." "They could kill you," she hissed. "Maybe, but if they wanted to kill someone and get away with it, why didn't they just kill us on the street? Why wouldn't they have killed you while you were standing here by yourself?" Crystal couldn't refute that. "I'll come back," she promised. I'll come back as quick as I can." She turned to go, but turned around again and leaned in close. Her lips were warm on his mouth, and she pushed away after only a few seconds. It was a few seconds that felt like an eternity, and like no time at all. "Don't die," she hissed, but she smiled while she did it. Then she was gone, and Dakota was left in one of his nightmares. He stood staring at the basement door, dreading the thought of it popping open to reveal some slobbering monster or hooded killer. If it did, he would run for his life and hope the police or the paramedics were somewhere close. The guy wouldn't kill him with witnesses. No way he could do that. And the adults would catch him and it would all be over. Maybe his stepdad would see the lights and hear the commotion and come out to see what was going on. He was a cop. He could get the guy. He could get the guy and be a hero and get a promotion at work. And when the door creaked slowly open, it took all of Dakota's fortitude not to piss his pants. He shone his light on that hollow space, but there was nothing there. What had opened that door if there was nothing there? Slowly, his curiosity got the better of him. He took a step forward. The light shook a little as he peeked down the stairs and into the heart of his terror. They were normal enough, just like the stairs down to his own basement, and the space at the bottom was nothing but bare concrete and dust. No, not just concrete. There was something there too. It was a strange, shadowed mass that stretched back into the darkness, and as he took a step to see it, he cursed his folly the second he heard the ruinous groan of old wood. The stair splintered, the step giving out beneath him, and Dakota plunged into the darkness like a stone into a well. He expected to fall forever, but he grunted as he landed on something wet and squishy. The spot beneath him felt like paper, or maybe blankets, and when he rolled over, he felt something poking into his arm. He winced as it poked at him, and when he rolled to the floor, he shone his light on the landing pad and wished he hadn't. For a moment, he didn't understand what he was seeing, and when it started to come together, he wished for ignorance. He landed on a pile of desiccated bodies, husks, mummies, the remains of people who had been squeezed of their nutrients as they passed through some massive digestive tract. No, not just people. They were kids. It wasn't just kids either, though the smaller ones were harder to tell. The bigger bodies, the human remains, still wore clothes, and many were frozen with expressions of fear and exquisite terror. As he backed away, he heard something thick sliding over the concrete of the basement, and moved his flashlight in time to see a massive, spade-shaped head. The light was in danger of falling from his hand. It was a huge snake. It may have once been a python of some kind, One of its parents, certainly. But as it hissed, he saw long teeth dripping clear liquid. Its body was like a tree, thick and writhing, and as it came towards him, he thought his earlier estimate of 9 feet may have been stupidly low. Its body spooled out behind it, 10, 11, 12, 15 feet long, its piss-yellow eyes boring into him like searchlights. It hissed again, its throat full of hate, and the hood unfurled as it rose to menace him. His thoughts raced as he backed away slowly. A snake. A goddamn snake. He had dismissed Nikki's ideas of ghosts, thinking the kids were being taken by your average garden-variety pervert. But this was beyond anything. This wasn't just a snake. It was an anaconda, a creature from dinosaur times, something out of a Conan comic. And it would have no trouble gobbling him up whole. Had this thing really been taking the kids? Was it really what he'd been looking for? It had been on their street the whole time. It could have easily picked any of them off, but had never found the time. He remembered Nikki saying that some of the snakes the people had taken after Henry Shelby's death were nasty. Looked like they'd missed the worst of them. He grunted as he came up short, his back against the shelf, and the pain as small objects fell on his head was second to the writhing, hissing monster before him. It was 5 feet away, an easy strike, and Dakota felt his hands looking for something on the shelf to save him. It was tensing, preparing to lunge, and he closed his eyes as his hand found something round and rough. "Jesus Christ!" someone shouted, and the exclamation was followed by the bellow of a shotgun. The snake twisted back towards the stairs, hissing in anger. Dakota saw ragged skin near its tail, and as it moved, he held up something in his hand and realized what it was. He pulled the end, the flare coming to life, the snake turning back towards him as the shotgun barked again. "Get away from me!" Dakota yelled, lobbing the flare at the snake as he reached back to see if there were more. The snake hissed as the flare hit it, slithering back against the far wall as it tried to get away from the boy with the burning fire and whoever was up the stairs shooting at it. Dakota found 2 more flares within easy reach and popped the end on the other as he waved it in front of him. Whatever it was, the snake wasn't stupid. It knew the fire would burn it, and as Dakota tossed this one at it too, he lit the last one as he made for the stairs. His stepdad was at the top, his shotgun pointed down at the basement, and he pulled the barrel up as Dakota yelled not to shoot. "Cody? Thank God, boy, are you okay? It didn't bite you, did it?" Dakota didn't answer. He started coming up the creaky stairs, tossing the last flare behind him and in the general direction of the snake. As he climbed, he heard it moving after him, the hated fire now out of his hand. Dakota's foot snapped through a board, but he jumped it as Crystal and his dad cheered him on. He could feel the hateful eyes behind him and almost shivered under the pressure of the serpent's gaze. When it lunged, however, it crashed into the stairs as its jaw came down on the splintery wood. Dakota wasted no time, and as he came even with the steps he had gone through at the top, he felt something rumble at the depths of the house. His dad pulled him into a hug, and the three had just enough time to turn and slam the door before the floor shook and the house groaned. They came out of the kitchen just as the door blew outward and kept running as flames sprang to life behind him. His stepdad kicked the boards aside as they came through the front door, and as they made the lawn, the flames were already devouring the dry wood of the Shelby place. The three of them sat on the front lawn as the cops arrived, watching it burn, hoping the serpent burned with it. The burning of the Shelby place and the mystery of the giant snake were all the news could talk about for the next month. The snake, some kind of hybrid species as far as they could tell from the bones, had been something Harold Shelby had been working on before his death. It had likely hatched after he had died and been missed by the people who had came to take his other subjects. It was assumed that it had been eating rats and bugs until it had grown large enough for bigger prey. Once it got big enough to get out of the house, it had began eating pets, and once it outgrew those, it moved on to tastier game. It had likely been denning in the house for the last decade, a zoologist said after, and its leavings could have been of great scientific study. Having seen those leavings, Dakota disagreed. Crystal and her father had had a long talk about what had happened, and it didn't appear they'd be returning to California anytime soon. Turned out that her father hadn't left her mother behind. Crystal's mother had run off after his last book had flopped, and he had taken the last of his savings and took a chance on a book that he was writing now. "I didn't want you to feel like it was your fault," he told her, "but I guess I failed at that too." His book, as it turned out, was going to have a very different ending than he had expected, and it was likely so sensational that he'd have to brand it as fiction to get anyone to pick it up. "I'm thinking of calling it Man-Eater," he told Dakota when they asked him about it a few weeks later. "Don't worry, though. I'll be sure to give each of you a writing credit in it." "Given the circumstances, I think I'd rather have some royalties," Nicky said with a chuckle. Nicky had broken his ankle. Had broken it pretty badly, actually. He was in a cast for the rest of the summer, but came back to school something of a local legend. They all did, all things considered, and Crystal started school next year without having to put up with any of the stigma of being the new girl. She became pretty popular, making friends easily, but she still made time for her best friends, especially for her boyfriend. The Shelby place burned to the ground that very night, and the neighborhood let loose a sigh of relief at its passing. Turned out that one of the flares Dakota had thrown rolled under some kind of tank, and it had gone off in spectacular fashion. There was very little left of the Man-Eater or her victims, but there had been enough teeth to identify nearly all the missing kids. Culver, too, gave a sigh of relief as the dark cloud that had hung over it for years dissipated. The curfew was lifted, and summer was officially back on. "Not bad for some fast and loose detective work, eh?" Nicky said, as he sat in Crystal's garage and drank pop, the sound of Nicky's SNES pinging away in the background. Dakota smiled. He had to agree. It was a summer that no one would forget for a long, long time. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I hope you enjoyed Man-Eater. It's something I've been working on for a little while, and it's something I'm hoping to adapt into a book in the coming future. If you've read the short story on Reddit or heard it all here, then don't worry. The book will definitely have some twists that we didn't get into here. The medium of short story is a little bit limited, and I'm really hoping to flesh it out in the coming novel. I do hope you've enjoyed one last summer adventure before we start the fall season and get into my favorite time of the year, the spooky season. Rest assured, I have lots of tricks and treats for you this year, so I hope you'll join me in October for a lot of spooky tales and a lot of fall tales to come. You all know what time it is if you've been with the channel long enough, and I'm sure you know that the Green Man will be making an appearance very soon. But that doesn't mean that the Pale Lady will be taking a break. I'm sure we'll be hearing lots more from Kashmir Botanical Gardens as well. Before we go, I'd like to give a very big thanks to my patrons and my YouTube members. I'm going to have to change my outro pretty quick because I haven't been thanking them. So, let's thank our Spooky Ghost contributors, Unicorn Hollow, our Spooky Skeleton contributors, Janet, Lady Vengeance, Lee Kendall, and Saikat, and our Ghostly Reader contributors, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, Jennifer Damron, and Chris Kensella. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you, and I really appreciate all you do for the show. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the ghostly reader tier since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.